Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, technically. We have a great panel here today. So it's going to be it's a privilege and a challenge to moderate a set of experts this distinguished. So just to quickly introduce our panelists, we have Professor Kleinwächter from Denmark. He's been a veteran of the ICANN, which I think most of you in this room will be familiar with the role it has played in the governance of Web 2 and the internet. He was with them for 20 years, a very distinguished expert in this field. Meghna Bal's a fellow at the Asia Center, and she has been a policy analyst and a lawyer in this space of tech for a while. And also has authored some great studies on the topic of crypto in India. To my right, we have a distinguished parliamentarian, Dr. Amar Patnaik. He is a PhD in economics. He has a very illustrious, distinguished career as a parliamentarian. He's also a member of our Standing Committee on Finance, which is India's parliamentary committee that deals with all these matters on digital currency and crypto, apart from a whole host of topics on finance. To his right is Mr. Vikram Sharma. He is a distinguished expert in cybersecurity and quantum cybersecurity, joining us from Australia. And at the far right, last but not least, is Mridul Gupta. He is the Chief Operating Officer of one of the largest crypto exchanges in India, CoinDCX. And just as a quick background to myself, I am Tanvi Ratna. I'll be your moderator for today. I am an engineer and policy analyst. I was earlier blockchain lead at Ernst & Young India, and I'm the founder of a think tank called Policy 4.0, which is working quite deeply on these issues in India. So to start us off, I think there's not been a panel in this whole conference where I've not heard metaverse or Web3 or crypto alluded to in some or the other way. It doesn't matter if it's a topic on human rights or the future of data and the internet. So in this session, we are going to focus to a good degree on the regulatory policy kind of dimensions of cryptocurrency, Web3 in general. So I'll start off with Meghna, since to set the tone, Meghna, for this policy exploration. What do you see as a policy analyst are the most misunderstood aspects of Web3 amongst policymakers?
Sure. Thanks, Tanvi. So I'd like to start actually with what are the most misunderstood aspects surrounding what concerns policymakers, because I think empathy is a good place to begin any conversation. So really this begets the question, why are we front-loading regulation in what is dubbed as the future of the internet when it's taken us so long to really regulate and govern Web 2.0? If you look at the history of regulation of what is dubbed as Web 2.0, it started in the late 90s, about over 30 years on from the first inception of the internet, with the introduction of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which essentially exempted internet intermediaries from liability from materials that were posted on user-generated content that was posted on their networks. It is only now, 25 years after the introduction of internet safe harbors, that we are increasingly clamping down on activity online. So why are we so comparatively wary of Web 3.0? So first, I think it is because we are moving from a digital ecosystem where information was currency to one which is underpinned by stores of value. So we are moving from a digital medium of products that are largely disaggregated to one primarily concerned with the notion of ownership. Quick illustration, as you alluded to earlier, also is, the purported ownership of data generated by activity online that Web3 will enable. Users will be able to track where their data is going and be able to successfully monetize it. So such constructs effectively trigger considerations around propertization of the online world and necessitate thinking, at the very least, about consideration around rights, claims, security, etc. Second, inherent to the juxtaposition of Web 2.0 against Web 3 is the greater complexity in user engagement. So you think about it, the extent of complexity when the internet really became commonplace was clicking a link using your mouse. And this paradigm is infinitely more complex. And add to that the fact that we have an unprecedented situation of 800 million users with devices, and that is terrifying for any policymaker. We also have to understand that, in contrast to Web 2.0, Web 3.0, the development of Web 3.0 has been, and the globalization of that development has been quite rapid. So, ARPANET, 1969, TCP/IP around the early 1980s, I think 1982, and then the first web browser in 1990. Relatively here, there's been about rapid globalization of development in about 5 to 8 years. So a corollary there also is this impetus within entrepreneurs in this space to, one, scale quickly, because you have to do that to grab opportunity in what is a fast-moving environment. But there's also a risk that, if there is a sudden downturn in the market or anything, what happens to the funds under your management? If you liquidate, who does that go to? Especially when rights are uncertain. That being said, getting into the kind of general misconceptions that seem to be there around this space that I've seen in India is one that decentralization confounds governance capabilities. But if you look very closely at this space, it is quite concentrated, both in terms of holdings of these assets as well as the activity on them. There's a study by the NBER that shows that around 75%, it was a 2020 or 2021 study, that shows that about 75% of activity around Bitcoin is concentrated in exchanges. The other misconception, I would say, is around traceability of transactions. And when I say traceability, it's more about the purpose of transaction that people are concerned with. But I would say that even in FinTech 1.0 with digital wallets, the intention of that transaction or the reason behind the transaction is not currently discoverable. So I'll just conclude there. Thanks.
Oh, that's a great overview, Meghna. So I think confounding and complex would probably, summarize the array of issues that policymakers are facing. So my next question is to Dr. Patnaik, and I think, the Standing Committee on Finance in the Indian Parliament has been one of the most proactive policy-making bodies in terms of crypto regulation, in terms of engagement with the industry. So, sir, could you summarize for us the major engagements undertaken by this committee to try and understand but also deliberate on this issue?
Thank you so much for this panel, to be in this panel. Great to be in this panel. I think the recognition of the fact that there are private digital assets existing and there is a market which is already there, that happened with the finance minister imposing that famous or infamous tax and 1% TDS in a budget speech. But simultaneously, almost at the same time, or a little before, what we thought was that we would engage with the crypto exchanges as well as other stakeholders in the finance committee to find out the kind of ecosystem that they would like to operate in. See, the main question in the entire deliberation on Web 3.0, or even Internet for that matter, is trust. Various stakeholders, is not just necessarily the players who are investing, various stakeholders need to have trust in the system. And who provides that trust? So the trust may not necessarily be coming from the government itself, may not come from the actors themselves, could be non-state actors as well. But then there has to be some place where it has to be mentioned. So that is what we wanted to understand, and invited the various exchanges, the various players, the regulators, existing regulators, that is the Reserve Bank of India, and since there are concerns as to, not concerns, there are opinions as to whether it should be treated as a currency, whether it should be treated as an asset class or a hybrid class. So we engaged with the RBI, we engaged with the SEBI, we engaged with we discussed about the various regulatory sandboxes that are available, or innovation sandboxes that are available, to see if there is any work that is happening in that space. Let me tell you, there is not much there in those sandboxes currently. I got a written reply to that. And then I raised that question also in Parliament, which Finance Minister agreed, that whether we have that issue of regulatory capacity. If you have a question of banning it, then do you have the capacity to actually enforce a ban? Now, all these issues have been discussed for the last 1 year. And then during the discussions with various enforcement agencies like the GST and the income tax, we also have engaged with them as regards their survey operations on some of the exchanges that they undertook, and what is their understanding of the ecosystem. So as far as regulatory preparedness is concerned, I think the committee has adequately prepared itself. The government itself, if you would remember, had come out with had introduced a bill which had the private crypto space, as well as the private digital asset space, as well as the central bank digital currency, CBDC. But now you would have seen that that bill has been withdrawn. Nobody is talking about it, whereas the CBDC is going forward. I had a meeting with the RBI governor just 15 days ago, and they have made that changes in the definition of assets currency, and they put CBDC over there. So they have also taken out a consultation paper, and so CBDC will be coming forward. And on CBDC, I think government, RBI as the regulator, is very confident, and that may actually be acting as the national regulatory sandbox for them, so that they can probably engage, get to know what it is happening. On the asset class as a script, I think as a security, the SEBI has already said that they have no regulatory capacity. Absolutely. So this is the way it is currently. But I agree with the Honorable Finance Minister when she went and said in both World Bank meetings and IMF meetings that there is a need for a global order, global principle-based order to be set up to regulate the private digital assets, or the broader space of 3.0. I think unless that happens, because it transcends cross-border, cross-geographical border nation states, it is very difficult to regulate. So I think we agree on that. The risks are enormous in a country like India, where about, there are just not digital illiteracy, there is also financial illiteracy, there are other kinds of illiteracy, and there are inequities as well. So when it happens, any kind of harm is caused to a community or even an individual, the Constitution requires that his rights has to be protected, he has to be given a fair deal. So whether the government would be in a position, because he runs to the government only, so whether the government would be in a position to safeguard his rights or to give him compensation for the harm. Now, for that, you need some kind of a regulation. Now, these are the things which have been discussed, are being discussed. We asked the entire India's who's who on the crypto when they met us in the finance committee to tell us a killer application in which would say that it is not that they are pushing the system. It is not technology driving innovation, but it is user requirement, a process driving innovation. They haven't been able to, in fact, come to us with that. So a lot of work needs to be done from all sides.
Thank you, sir. That was a very good summarization. So let's go to the industry player, in the room. And Mridul, from your perspective, as you guys have also one of the oldest firms, you've operated through many different climates within Indian regulation. So what have been your major challenges with the policy process as a startup?
Sure. So I think when we see India with respect to a lot of global peers and a lot of innovation happening in this ecosystem around Web 3.0, I don't see us at the forefront yet. Do we have the potential? Yes, definitely, but we are not yet there. And the primary reason for this is because I think just the way we are seeing the entire crypto and blockchain ecosystem in India is with a very single lens. We are only seeing the financial market side of it, which is buying and selling of Bitcoin and registering a profit to be able to get investor capital gains out of it, right? It's not that simple a technology. I would even go and say that Web 3.0 is not an industry. It's a medium, right? And this medium impacts multiple industries. There's a financial market side to it. There is core infrastructure and improvement of infrastructure side to it. Like supply chains could be better. The digitization of records, real estate could be better. Digitization of police cases could be better, right? Because of the immutable aspect of blockchain. And then there is business application side of it. So I think we need to look at the overall picture when we look at a policy or a framework or even a regulation for regulating something as complex as Web 3.0. And we need to make baby steps to make sure that the investor confidence, the ecosystem confidence, and the entrepreneurial activities are not stopped. But at the same time, it's not that 1 billion people's money is at stake, right? So it's not that 1 billion people are not protected for their financial wealth, which we have seen in the past 30 years of financial markets in India has been the case, right? So I think my biggest challenge, which I have reiterated multiple times over the past couple of years, is that we are looking at it from a very single lens, number one, and there hasn't been a healthy dialogue between the industry participants and how we are designing the frameworks around policy, around taxes, around all of those pieces, right? Taxation, I don't think is regulation. Taxation is a very different aspect. Regulation is very complex beast altogether. So taxation, I believe, is a more knee-jerk reaction. It was supposed to achieve something. Has it achieved that? Maybe, maybe not. But I think such knee-jerk reaction, what ends up happening is that there are a lot of countries around India, 3 hours away, 5 hours away, where you can take a flight and you can pretty much come back the same day and run your company from those countries, right? And you know which names I'm taking. Invariably, we are seeing a lot of developers flee to these countries. Invariably, we are seeing a lot of entrepreneurial activity flee to these countries. I think we should not be late in terms of capturing this new technology, which can help India position itself for as the big economic success in the next 10 years.
Sure. Yeah. So a holistic perspective, looking at it from a wide lens, giving room for confidence in the technology. I think it's helpful at this point to maybe step out of India, and this has happened before as well in our very lives, right? And I think Web 2.0 was also a bubble before it became a reality, and we have with us a very distinguished veteran from that period who worked on just the governance architecture of Web 2. So, Dr. Kleinwächter, I think, what were the most difficult debates that you face in the governance of the internet at ICANN? And what do you think are the differences in the Web 2.0 debate and the Web 3.0 governance debate?
Thank you, Tanvi, and thank you for having me. The problem is what I see is Web3 or the metaverse. Is this just an extension of the existing internet, or is this a new beast? Is this a new phenomenon? When we started with ICANN, it was in the end of the 90s, we had the philosophy, one world, one internet. This was internet 1.0, and the internet is, as we know, a network of networks. Certainly you can regulate each individual network in a separate way, but using the same protocol, this allows that everybody can communicate with everybody, everywhere, every time. This was the unique innovation, and this was really new. So before that, it didn't exist that everybody could communicate with everybody. It was a dream laid down in Article 19 of the Human Rights Declaration, communication without borders. But it was realized and implemented by the network of networks using the same protocol. With the Web 2.0, things started already to change, because then we realized that many things are happening on the application layer, not on the ground layer. And we had this one world, one internet on the ground layer, but we did see tendencies for the splinter net on the application layer, so that we, wallet gardens in the industry or national segments, developed by governments which wanted to control it, data localization and all this. And this continues into our time, so that we discuss fragmentation, splinter net, but this is on the application layer. We are still with this one world, one internet on the ground layer, but on the application layer we see an unavoidable tendency towards a splinter net. So every country says now, my country first. It started with America first, and then China first, and now India first, and also, this promotes the splinter net. And now the Web 3. How far this will go. Is this an extension of the debate we have with one, or is this something new? I was in a panel in the World Economic Forum in Davos about the metaverse, and they discussed another approach and said, in the Internet 1.0, the Internet was a little bit away from the individual. So with individual, and here we had the computer. With the smartphone, the internet moved into our pockets. And in the metaverse, the internet will move into our bodies with chips and bracelets and glasses and earphones. So that means that becomes very individualized. And if you speak now about regulation or innovation, so this is a tremendous mix between the individual use and then the responsibility of the society. That's why privacy, security are becoming such important things. So now we are talking about hacking of a corporation. But what about you as an individual are hacked? If the device you have in your body becomes a target for somebody else. So I do not have answers to this question. But it's very good that you have raised the question, because this will stimulate the debate in the years ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for those distinguished remarks. And I think, Bikram, also to get in more international perspectives, you said very clearly that you feel, trust is at the basis of all of this. So can you speak to that from your experience with quantum and cyber?
Thank you very much, Tanvi, and good afternoon. And thank you to the ORF for hosting an amazing 3 days of discussions. Is that better? Can you hear me now? So really building on the comments from Dr. Patnaik and my colleague Wolfgang there, trust really is fundamental. With Web 3, we really see a further intertwining of our digital, biological, and the physical spheres. More than ever before, those are all going to be integrated. And increasingly, our lives and our societies will be played out in the digital realm. But to support the timely and, adoption at scale, it is absolutely critical that we have trust in those systems and platforms which support the development of the Web 3. I think Dr. Patnaik very eloquently put out the institutional frameworks that need to exist to foster that trust, but equally there's a technology element. The systems, the platforms need to be secure. In Web 2.0, we brought, as Wolfgang just mentioned, an incredible innovation, and indeed it's probably went well beyond what it was originally designed for. Maybe even beyond what we could imagine that it could have done. However, as weekly events, nearly every week, once or twice, what you do see is that there's market failure. And you find that those systems where you have entrusted an enterprise, an agency, with your valuable information is breached. And you are put at risk. The number of examples that have occurred just in the last couple of months where personally identifiable information has been revealed at great cost to the holders of that information, and equally to whose information has been compromised. So I would contend that in this particular case, regulation has been lacking. As we now look to the Web 3, we really see there's an opportunity to really build in and engender that trust right from the get-go. And thereby really maximize the benefits that this incredible set of technologies, the convergence of these technologies, will bring to society and individuals. So two key elements of fostering this trust are confidentiality, or privacy, I guess is a synonym for that, and authentication. So you know the person that you're dealing with at the other end of the line is who they purport to be. And it's absolutely critical that as we think about this Web 3.0, we build systems, we build platforms around this, that technology capabilities that support driving this trust and supporting this trust are built in and not added on as we're doing with Web 2.0 as an afterthought. So this is where we think that regulation and standards can really work to ensure that this occurs successfully and really unlock the innovation and the potential of this, thereby addressing some of the market failures that we've seen. Because we've often seen that security, trust is afterthought. It's the commercial objective that I'm going for. Well, I'll kind of wear the risk of potentially this trust being broken. But if we bring in appropriate and adequate regulation, we can ensure that the market participants and not just market participants, but federal agencies are equally taking care of our most valuable asset today. As I've said, information is the new gold, and we need to make sure we protect it with an appropriate Fort Knox. Thank you.
Yeah, great point there, Vikram. And I think I'll encourage the audience to start thinking through your questions. We'll start taking questions soon. Dr. Patnaik, would you like to respond to that?
I just wanted to add something which Mr. Vikram Sharma spoke about. Of course, when there are market failures, we need to have regulations to address those issues of market failures. In case of technology, I have written a piece on regulation of metaverse in Hindustan Times, I think about 15 days ago. It's so complex in a country like India. Imagine an avatar of you or somebody else has been assaulted on the metaverse by somebody else. How do you do the prosecution under the IPC? How do you do the prosecution under IPC or CRPC? Now, does it mean that the entire IPC in Indian Penal Code, which has been there for, I think, some more than 100 years now, would have to be changed? So this would probably happen to all the rules and regulations. So in this case, there is something called, as you mentioned, there is a space where regulation is not there. There is a space in which regulation may be there, but the technology will drive it to be changed. And that's a Herculean task itself. So these are the complexities that one has to deal with. It is good that it should be promoted, regulation should not stifle innovation, harms should be minimized, there should be safeguards, there should be protections. But to implement all that, the existing regulations, the existing ecosystem of regulations would require a complete overhaul. And who is going to do that? It is the government which will have to do that. And that would require a separate set of consultations, because the courts have to be taken into account, because they are the final arbiters in this kind of situations, whether to take cognizance of such cases or not. Thank you.
Yes, so with that brave new world sort of image, I think I see a lot of nods and disagreements in the audience. So the floor is open for questions, and then we'll resume with the panel. Yes, ma'am. Please introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Prajakta Kualekar. I work as a product manager and trying to learn about this. So I wanted to put this question a little bit on its head, right? One is that how do we regulate Web3? But it's also how do we let or have Web3 regulate us better? Right? Because like Mridul said, because Web3 is a paradigm, right? Like I'm thinking it could be used for more participatory policy making. Right? So I wanted to learn from the panel a little bit on if we were to just reimagine, running the state or running industries with like the paradigms of Web3, how would it be?
Yeah, so I think that's open to all the panelists. I'll also plug in our organization here. So Policy 4, which I founded, is on this mission of how does the state sort of reinvent for these new paradigms, right?
This is exactly what I was saying at the end. One is that need to have regulations. Invariably happens that regulations lag technology. Technology is already there, so regulations have to be made. But the other way, in case of metaverse, is that the technology might change the regulations, the perspective of regulation itself, the existing regulations itself. And then the worst part is, even if the regulations are, the state-made regulations exist or do not exist, the other universe would still exist. And as long as the market is functioning properly, there is no problem. The moment there is a market failure, the space which is not being regulated, the actors would again come back to the space, the same institutions where things are much more defined to help them out. Whether it is the courts, so a Supreme Court bench would be deciding whether this particular offense did happen or not happen. And what they have to refer to, what is the Indian Evidence Act, which doesn't recognize a number of things, which the event would have actually involved a number of things which the Evidence Act doesn't recognize. How do they decide? So new laws have to be made. So the promotion happens, the market grows. Nobody should stop the market. Innovation helps people, digital economy, their own life, as you said also, they get benefit from their policy. Exchanges can probably happen better. The moment there is a harm, it is the citizen as a fundamental right under the constitution of any country would demand from the government that his right is protected.
I would love to add to that. See, I think when you talk about Web 3.0, there are multiple applications it can have. We are already seeing some of the countries where the currency is very destabilized adopt Bitcoin as a reserve of value, right? India, we are very safe. We have a very robust payment system. We have a very robust currency management, and hence we don't feel the need for that as a store of value. But there are already multiple nations which are adopting Bitcoin as a store of value. What Web 3.0 fundamentally does is it democratizes the gatekeeping of the internet, right? So earlier, you have a big corporation which is guarding the internet in some form or the other. It democratizes that. What are the applications or implications for India? For example, today we don't have our own app store. Today we don't have our own search engine. Today we don't have our own social network. We don't have our own messaging protocol. We don't have our own mobile ecosystem. We don't have our own infrastructure for storing files, for offering equivalent of servers on demand, for offering domains, right? So all of this is something where we have been lagging because we were not the first ones on the internet. We were still in a very different era when the internet was getting born. Now, what Web 3.0 does fundamentally is it is challenging those corporations which have been guarding these ecosystems for a very long time. And I think that's where we can have a role to play in terms of, first, I think what our government is doing is also sort of going after these ecosystems and creating, whether with the help of CCI or whether with the help of localization of data or with the help of nationalized players, some form of ecosystem which guards India as a country on these technological grounds. I think Web 3.0 fundamentally does the same thing, and if we marry this thought with that thought, I think we can fundamentally achieve very great heights.
Okay, I think you've sparked quite the debate even amongst the panelists. Should we just quickly take a few questions and then have both of you respond? Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if it's working, but
Okay.
I think I'll be
It's on.
It's on.
Oh, hi. So I think the term Web3 encompasses a few components, of which crypto is partly one, but also there's metaverse, right? And to the point, and I think my question is from both the policy-making lens as well as the business lens, which is simply that our understanding of the metaverse is solely mediated by one company right now. And we know that it's Meta. And Meta also continues to control largely the critical infrastructure for propping up the metaverse through its acquisition of Oculus. So how do we ensure that in so many ways Web3 is not going to replicate the same power structures that have come to define Web 2.0? You have the big tech continuing to control critical infrastructure in Web 2.0. What is to say Meta is not going to replicate the same power structures? So that's one, and I think it's a question that also touches upon the policy-making side of things about the power of competition commissions and antitrust regulators across geographies, right? Particularly when distributed supply chains come into play. Because most of, say, Blue Horizon's 3D assets will be probably produced by a Bangalore-based company, or the games that are going to be hosted on a metaverse are coming from different quarters of the world. So how do we,
Okay. Yeah, very good question. I will take two more questions. Yes.
Interesting panel. I am from the government of Sri Lanka, your neighbor. So what is happening in the government of India in this policy domain really given a lot of opportunities for Sri Lanka to learn and adapt fast. I have one comment that, and the question is about the Professor Wolfgang about this ICANN's engagement in promoting this in multilingual platforms. So India being a multilingual country, so if it is going to be a success in the, because the policies to be adopted and the regulations to be adapted for the future, not for the past. So therefore, not for what the devices or the technologies or the platforms but are existing may not be the base for the policy direction. So what's the role of ICANN and how far it is influential in shaping this policy dialogue to bring this inclusiveness? Otherwise, it will be limited to only a few major speaking languages in the world.
Great.
Thank you.
Also, good question. Yes, sir.
My name is Sring Sige. I'm from Bhutan. Many say that Web 3.0 provides the opportunity to democratize the online experience and enable the users to reclaim control over their own data. But looking at the way the big tech operates now, it looks like it's going to be a big change if that is really going to happen. So I would like to ask Professor Wolfgang, based on your experience with Web 2.0, do you really think that these things will happen with Web 3.0? And if so, how do you think the big tech will respond? I think their business model has to change in that case. Thank you.
Excellent. So I think there were already points that Dr. Wolfgang and Meghna were to respond to. Now you have a bigger bouquet of questions. Okay. So go ahead.
Yeah, there are a number of issues. First thing, you know what ICANN did already since the early 2000 years was the idea is to internationalize domain names. So because ICANN is not the world government of the internet, it has a very limited technical function to manage the domain name system. Even for IP addresses, we have regional internet registries. It's for Asia, India, it's APNIC in Australia. But for the domain name system, so to give the IP numbers a human face, a name, so this is the responsibility of ICANN. And everything was based on the ASCII code in the beginning when the DNS was invented. And so we realized very early that people in China, in Russia, with the many different languages using different characters in the alphabet, so that they have a problem. So even, you know, in the Arab countries, they write from the right side to the left side. In an email, you write from the left to the right. So all these were problems. And so this was a challenge for ICANN, and we did it quite successfully. So that means we have now, together with UNESCO, which is also an intergovernmental organization for culture and languages. So, and we introduced now more than 100 different languages with different characters, so that you can use this in your natural language. So unfortunately, the experience is it's underused. So a good example is Russia. So because they wanted to have the Cyrillic RF domain for Rossiyskaya Federatia. And, you know, when this was introduced, you know, the minister said, this is now the Russian internet. But the majority of Russian users are still using the .ru, the ASCII domain. So that means it's available, but it depends from the user, how they make use of it. A lot of internet people prefer to use the ASCII code and continue with English. So that means to create more awareness that this is available and to make use of it would be extremely helpful. So the other question you mentioned or raised, this is the old dilemma of the communication relationship between code makers and lawmakers. This is not new. So they are, you know, 25 years ago, an American professor, Lessing, wrote a good book, Code is Law. So, and they said, you know, in the information age, code regulates everything and lawmakers are too late. So that's not true. So that means you have to both. The only way forward is to go beyond this mutual ignorance and to enhance communication. So that's really create a lot of problems. If lawmakers are not aware what the code makers are doing, so, and it's also a big risk if code makers are not interested what the challenges for the lawmakers are. The only way forward is what we call in the ICANN environment the multi-stakeholder collaboration. So that means you have to discuss it and to clarify it before you make decisions. So, and the enhanced communication between lawmakers and code makers is the only way forward. And here we have, unfortunately, not the mechanisms. So we have, in the representative democracy, finally all the lawmaking capacity goes to a parliament. So in ICANN we discussed since 20 years whether the representative democracy should not substitute it, but enriched by participatory elements. So the participatory democracy is not a substitute for the representative democracy, but it enriches it. And here we do not have yet mechanisms. So we need procedures, we need mechanisms which would allow a higher degree of participation in lawmaking by non-state actors or non-parliamentarians. So it's a big challenge and it's a power question. I understand all this. Man who has power or woman who has power is not ready to share it, but the internet is based on the philosophy of sharing. So, and that's the dilemma. Sharing philosophy, but, you know, concentration of power in one hand. So we have to live with this dilemma, and this will not be easy to overcome. With regard to regulation and 3.0, as I said, you know, it's interesting. In the early days, we said no regulation. So innovation without permission, let them do, let thousands of flowers blow. Then we realized with Web 2.0, and even big companies, you heard it from Microsoft and you heard it from Meta, they said, we want to have regulation. So that but what is the next step? Because in the Meta, so regulation is needed. But probably we need a new type of regulation, which includes participatory elements and which offers both the flexibility for future market developments and the stability you need to protect human dignity and human values. So that's really new territory. So we have to be innovative. Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, always argued, the internet is innovation of technology, but so far we do not have innovation in policy. So we are still using political instruments from the 20th century, but we live in the 21st century. We have to be more innovative in policy making. I'm an academic person, I can raise the questions. It's up to the policymakers to implement this.
Great. Megha?
Yes, YJ Park, and currently the director of the India-Korea Center for Research and
Could we
Innovation.
take questions after 5 minutes, please? Let them just respond since 3 questions were raised.
Okay.
Just I'll come to you. I'll come
But
to you and the lady in the back.
since I was at the beginning of ICANN together with Wolfgang, and I've been witnessing a lot of the developments of this whole regulatory challenges. And so when Wolfgang responded to the Sri Lanka gentleman from government, there is some kind of the misunderstanding about why the IDN could not be very popular. Because if Wolfgang remember, I was the first advocate of the international domain names in early 2000. I've been attending all the international meetings, and I really tried to persuade the American government and European Union and ITU and everybody. ITU was the only international body which was willing to listen to that demand from Asia Pacific. At that time, the strong demand was coming from Asia, of course, because a lot of the people from Asian region, we couldn't really speak English properly. When we attended this ICANN meeting, a lot of the public consensus was made in English without that much kind of the preparation at that time. You understand a lot of the disaster and chaos at that time. And so, but it took how many years? 11 years. And I started back in 2000. The time I can approve that IDN officially was 2011. Of course, it's like the first come, first serve. All those, the companies like the Google and, everybody was already over there. So when American government was able to allow, finally you can use IDN like 2011, everybody kind of forgot. The demand from this kind of IDN issues. Of course, that's why everybody speak kind of like try to use this gateway in English. And there's a lot of the political kind of the dialogue and agenda. And so another thing, I know this panel started like this is the transnational environment where government can be very ineffective to regulate this technology. But if we share the Korean kind of the regulatory environment, I mean, magically Korean government is so effective to regulate. So a lot of those kind of the burden comes to local companies because they are not transnational enough. And so all the internet companies on the Korean jurisdiction, they suffer from a lot of this internet regulation. They always complain to Korean government, why only you are regulating Korean companies when we are competing with Google and YouTube, Amazon, and everybody who Korean the regulatory body cannot regulate them only because they are transnational players. But I mean, we kind of say the companies like Naver and all those Korean companies, they can be also transnational. They can go everywhere, but their main market is in Korea. Therefore, they have been under very strong regulation. They've been paying a lot of taxes. And so now there have been a lot of the scandal. The Google made a huge amount of money in Korea, but somehow they don't really pay that much in Korean national jurisdiction because they kind of like can do whatever they want, like in terms of this financial record. And so this is very unfair. So we have some fantasy. We have been kind of advocating the internet is difficult to regulate, and internet is transnational, and internet, as you said, kind of like is one word. I mean, whose word is it? Is it basically the only players' word? I mean, we've been all kind of using those services, and now it's been more than 20 years. I mean, we have been kind of like hearing the same advocate for 20 years. Now we have to review. Was it really true? Was it really one word? And Jeff Moss, like in the other cybersecurity session, he already kind of, suggested there could be the different basket. I mean, that kind of the analogy was there, but when people like us, when we present that kind of the argument, it's like a balkanization of the internet. And now
I
it's
take your point. That's
diversity
a
of the
very
internet.
powerful point.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that very authentic experience. So this balkanization, the unfair regulations. Meghna, would you like to speak on the multiple regulatory questions brought up?
Yeah.
We're also nearing the end, so any last
I'd
one or
also,
two questions?
yeah. So I'd like to start with kind of jumping off Midul's point about the lack of dialogue or the lack of formal channels of dialogue between regulators or policymakers and industry. And that is primarily a function of the fact that this industry is still not regulated in India. In the absence of regulation, I think there is no possibility of a formal channel of communication. Even if legislation was to be tabled, there would have to be a consultation on it, which would make that process a little more participative. But there seems to be a considerable amount of resistance on the part of certain parts of the policy-making apparatus in India to move to that stage. In response to your question, really about concentration risks in the crypto industry, following from what we are seeing in Web 2.0, I would say that the openness of innovation or open blockchain networks are the biggest counter to that. And I think that we have one Indian company, or we have multiple Indian companies. We have CoinDCX as well, but we have Polygon, which is a kind of shining example of how this ecosystem has really democratized innovation. You have three basically kids who are fresh out of college who built this ecosystem and bootstrapped a little bit of money and brought it together and developed it a little more, and then just went in for an initial exchange offering on Binance and raised, I think, $5 million from that. And now they're one of the most significant players in this ecosystem. And I would say the only threat to that is the kind of pushing of greater centralization of technology and of access in this ecosystem, where a lot of certain players or certain individuals or stakeholders are pushing for the picking of a certain technology or a national blockchain technology or blockchain without crypto. To me, blockchain without crypto essentially means a closed blockchain system, and that brings to the fore the same kinds of concentration risks that you are talking about in Web 2.0.
Okay, I think one last question. The lady in the back had a question, and then we'll move to closing remarks. Yes, okay, one more question.
Hi, my name is Anushka and I'm a public policy consultant. My question is to Mridul specifically. I was just really curious to understand how is the industry reacting to the concept note on CBDC? Do you look at it as a move towards more control and centralization, or is it larger acceptance of newer technologies and finance?
Sure. So I think CBDC, the entire notion around CBDC is from a currency part of it, right? So how can currency be made better in terms of tracking circulation, in terms of banning the bad notes, in terms of banning the bad actors? What UPI did was digitization of transfers. What CBDC is doing is digitization of currency. It has limited implications or impact on the crypto ecosystem because fundamentally CBDC is controlled by few nodes, even if it isn't blockchain. And these nodes could be 1 or these nodes could be 100, but it's limited to central banks and various other banking and financial institutions. The role it plays obviously is immense in terms of in a country like India, you still need to open a bank account to be able to access the financial ecosystem. And when you think about tier 3, tier 4 towns, it becomes extremely difficult because you don't have the physical infrastructure. So it does definite good there. I don't think CBDC is positioned from an internal usage. It is still positioned more from an international trade perspective, where the applications are again humongous, because right now the international trade is governed in US dollars, and what CBDC could do to this ecosystem is basically get India back in the game of international politics and movement of money. This has very limited applications on crypto side, because fundamentally what crypto is doing is decentralization of technology and ecosystems, and hence creating value out of those ecosystems, right? So be it Bitcoin, be it Ether, be it Polygon, be it BNB, they are fundamentally creating newer ecosystems on top of already existing ecosystems. Just like the internet did not replace the telephones, it was an additional step in terms of communication and various other efficiencies. Both are playing at different tangents to each other. CBDC is more around movement of money and primarily for international trade and very, very early stages, and blockchain and crypto is more around enabler of democratization of technology, democratization of software creation, and Web 3.0, which creates new opportunities for the entrepreneurs.
Okay, so the organizers have given me a signal, so we are at time. So, but the speakers will be around. So we'll move to closing remarks from all our speakers. We can start with you, Dr. Patnaik.
So I'll just, you see, privacy, informational privacy, and human rights are inalienable rights in almost every jurisdiction. They are, in India, they are a part of our fundamental rights. The courts have read that right to life includes right to informational privacy. Now, these fundamentals, just taking it forward from what Dr. Wolfgang was saying, that these fundamental rights are a part of the Constitution, would be upheld by the court, irrespective of whatever be the technology being used. Technology cannot supplant the law, and therefore this conversation between the code developers and the lawmakers has to be a continuous process. The conversation currently is that the regulation should be changed in such a manner that the technological innovations can take place. That conversation will have a juridical end if it goes to the code of law. That's my final say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Professor Wolfgang, any closing remarks?
Yes, a very short remark. Don't be afraid. Innovate policy making.
Wonderful. Vikram, Mridul.
Thank you very much. We are at time, so I'll keep it very short, but perhaps just to raise that there's another emergent technology sphere, that of quantum, which will have an intersection with what we're seeing in Web 3.0. So just getting into the weeds very briefly is that the capabilities of advanced quantum computers will impact a lot of the technologies that we use today to secure our information exchanges and indeed to identify or to establish the authenticity of third parties. So we need new mechanisms as we think about Web 3.0, which will continue to assure us of the privacy and confidentiality of our exchanges and the ability to authenticate who's on the other end of the communications channel. I would refer you to a report. We work quite closely with the World Economic Forum, which was just put out 2 weeks ago, which is called Transitioning to a Quantum Safe Economy. That provides you quite a good, it's about a 30-page report, overview of some of the issues we might want to think about as we consider Web 3.0.
Thanks, Vikram. Good plug as well. Meghna, would you like to?
Yeah, I'd actually like to start with a response to the lady in the back and her point about the CBDC note. So I think with rhetoric like that in general, I think we need to question whether it is productive now, given that this is an ecosystem that is being largely encouraged globally. and it is a global ecosystem, and it is hard to, and the balkanization of the internet or digital spaces is not complete. So in that context, whether such rhetoric is really useful. The second thing I'd like to say is that I think our discussion here and the topic of regulating the space in general merits a considerable amount of introspection on the part of policymakers. Yes, there are multiple risk-based frameworks that we can adopt principles from. There are multiple frameworks that already exist that we can adopt principles from. So it's not that this space is not regulable. And we've seen multiple examples of this space being regulated across the world to establish that it is not beyond regulation. But I think in the unique challenge that India faces is one of capacity and recognizing limitations. So once that limitation is recognized, for instance, is one regulator too overstretched to be able to look into the space? Perhaps another regulator, though they may not feel like they have the capacity to oversee the space, may be better suited. But even in that construct, I think there's a necessity for triage, or to use a triage-based approach where you're identifying, what the highest order of public interest concerns are, and then regulating in a phased manner so that you're not impinging or you're not overwhelming state capacity that is already limited. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Meghna. And closing remarks, Mridul, the final word.
Thanks. I think the key word here is trust. I think Web 2.0 / internet had a lot of problems, primarily in terms of concentration of power and asymmetry of information, but doesn't mean that it did not do any good. I think the last 25 years have been the internet era, where it transformed the way we live and that transformed the way we do business. I think when it comes to Web 3.0 and blockchain, we need to do something similar. What we can do better probably is that trusted relationship between policy and industry, and drive for the inconsistencies sooner than later. I think that's a major takeaway for me, and that's the thought I would leave you with. In terms of the immediate next step, I think finding the right person or the right body to regulate, or to have a right dialogue from an industry perspective, where we are working and creating a body across Web3 ecosystem, which means exchanges, NFT players, blockchain and developer ecosystems. This body will soon come, and we'll love to have dialogues with the respected ministries, with the policy think tanks and potential regulators in terms of paving the way forward for the Indian Web3 ecosystem.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for your participation and questions. We've come to the end of the session.